Great. Thank you, Mark, and thank everyone for coming today. Again, the governor sends his regrets. I know that he wanted to have the opportunity to speak on charter schools and speak to all of you today, but scheduling conflicts, as you might imagine, got in the way. Things are fairly busy upstairs at the moment. So if you allow me, I'm going to make a couple comments about charter schools in general, charter school legislation, and what's been taking place in West Virginia and where we hope that things might go in the future. So as I'm sure you all know, this has been a big year for education around the country and specifically in West Virginia. I think starting with the Race to the Top application and the push from the federal government last fall really brought a spotlight to what was happening in the state and what could happen in the state. And I know there's diverse opinions about the pros and cons of the federal opinion, but I think it's the reality of our situation. And with the Race to the Top asking states to have charter schools and incorporate a variety of other education reforms, I think the ball really got moving here in a lot of ways. As I mentioned, charter schools I think has been an important part of that debate. Senator Eric Wells put forth a Senate bill in February, and then the governor called an education special session and a work group to come together, and they also developed their own charter school legislation. That group was made up of representatives of the House, the Senate, the Department of Education, the governor's office, and teachers' unions. They worked for approximately 40 hours worth of meetings, over a dozen sessions, trying to come to some sort of consensus about a variety of bills that the governor initially proposed and that the unions themselves brought later. Unfortunately, over the weekend it became clear that the second charter school legislation was not going to make the call. We're disappointed. Of course, I felt that there was good compromise that was achieved between different groups, but we'll keep our fingers crossed that it goes forward in the future. From my angle, I think a lot of the opposition that has grown up to charter schools in West Virginia is really coming from misinformation or myths about what charter schools may or may not be. So I'd like to read a very short, clear definition from the U.S. Department of Education's Charter Schools program. Charter schools provide enhanced parental choice and are exempt from any statutory and regulatory requirements. In exchange for increased flexibility, charter schools are held accountable for improving student academic achievement. The objective is to replace rules-based governance with performance-based accountability, thereby stimulating the creativity and commitment of teachers, parents, and citizens. I think this is a fairly straightforward approach, and I think it's also a reasonable exchange. Folks that I've talked to suggest that all good teachers want to be better teachers. They want their students to achieve, they want their schools to do well, and good teachers are also not afraid of accountability. And I think the accountability debate that gets tossed into this also has a fair amount of myths and confusion about it. Nobody wants accountability to be created in such a way that a teacher's pay or a principal's pay is tied to one test score. It doesn't make sense. It's unfair to teachers, it's unfair to students, and it places undue weight on something that is an important part of the evaluative process, but should not be the sole foundation of the evaluative process. And Dr. Payne, along with many others from the Department of Education, has been working on a new system for evaluation and assessment in the state, and I think that's going to be presented to LOCIA December 1st, and then introduced into, hopefully into the full legislative session in February. So I know this group has worked very hard, and hopefully we'll continue on that front as well. And I think people often expect that charter schools are an attack on teachers, that they would eliminate a student authority system, and as I mentioned, would tie pay to one test score. None of these are true. I think the proposed legislation that the Education Work Group put forward in the last several weeks did not touch personnel laws whatsoever, and still it was deemed unpassable. So I hope that it's really just misinformation and not a complete unwillingness to change and accept new ideas or look at alternative ways of doing things. And I also want to say that we're very realistic about the potential of charter schools. They're not a silver bullet solution. There are good charter schools, there are bad charter schools, just like there are good public schools and there are bad public schools. And everybody, I think, realizes that they can't solve every problem in education, but they're an important possibility that I think states, students, teachers, and families should have if they want to provide the best possible education for their children. We firmly believe that giving students and parents an option, creating an environment where teachers have more freedom and flexibility to innovate, where parents or communities are more involved, is the right thing to do for students and is the right thing to do for West Virginia. So despite the setbacks that have taken place recently, I think we're going to continue forward on this point. And I know Mark mentioned a few things, but I think it's fairly obvious that the status quo is not serving all of West Virginia students well. I think, of course, some students are very well served by the system we have, but the fact that the high school dropout rate in the state is about 26%. We've got, I think, approximately 74% of our students that graduate from high school. Of those that graduate, approximately 58% go on to college, and of those that go on to college, roughly half, actually more like 44%, graduate in 6 years. So I think charter schools are an important piece of the puzzle, but I think also it's important to look more broadly at this as an education pipeline issue. The end goal of having an educated citizenry is to have people who can participate in the democratic process, who can think critically, who can be creative, who can contribute to their communities, their families, their economy, and who can provide the workforce backbone that West Virginia needs. And by strengthening our school system, I think we can make strong steps towards achieving those goals. And I think one point that the governor has stated over and over again is what he wants to do is create legislation that allows teachers to teach and allows leaders to lead. I think we hear from teachers in the current system that the number of tests that they have to do, the number of things that take away their time from actually teaching students hurts the schools, hurts the students, hurts everybody's ability to learn the system to function. And the last thing the governor wants is to increase the level of bureaucracy and the amount of time the teachers are spending on other activities. We think the charter school would be one way to provide teachers an opportunity to focus more on what they want to do, which is teach the children of West Virginia. And also, research coming out recently, and especially the research that Secretary Duncan and President Obama often bring forth, is that having a highly qualified teacher is the single most important factor in students' learning. And what we want to see is a system where it's easier to hire the best possible teachers and put them in front of students. Also, one of the other most important factors is having a strong educational leader in the school, the principal or the superintendent system as well. We want to strengthen the ability to bring in good principals who can model educational leadership for the teachers and ultimately benefit the students in the best way possible. As I've said before, a lot of this has come out of the Race to the Top application, but a lot of this also has been building for some time. I think West Virginia for Education Reform, Tim McClung, Beth Adams, and others have been working hard to bring charter schools into the state. Eric Wells has been a strong advocate of this, and I hope will continue to be. Unfortunately, it hasn't come forth quite yet. And as many of you know, but I'll revisit briefly, in April, in response to the feedback that we got from our Race to the Top application, the governor challenged the State Board of Education to put forth a reform agenda. Superintendent Steve Payne and Board President Priscilla Hayden responded and put forth a comprehensive 28-point agenda for education reform, of which charter legislation is a part. The special session in May did not provide enough time and opportunity for these bills to be worked through in their entirety, which is where the education work group came from. And this group, I think, really did a good job of meeting and debating, of trying to compromise. And I've heard from many, many people who participated in that group and otherwise, some of the issues that have been discussed and debated openly around education reform in West Virginia have not been seen in decades, and hopefully will continue to push forward. I think talking about pay for performance, changes to personnel laws, teacher hiring practices, alternative certification, all of these things are important, all of these things are happening on the national level, and I think all of these things are going to continue to take place, or at least be discussed in West Virginia. From my perspective, it's one of those situations where the box has been opened, the push is coming from a lot of different levels, both grassroots, in-state, and from Washington, D.C., and from other states. And I think this debate is certainly not over, and we'll all continue to work hard on this front and build off of the consensus and the relationships that were built over the last several months. So I'll stop there. Again, I'm sorry that the governor himself couldn't be here today, but I want to thank all of you for coming and thank all of you for the hard work that you do for education reform here in West Virginia and around the country.